In this video, we're going to consider different perspectives around job hopping. Should you be job hopping? And job hopping in this case, of course, means switching jobs every 1 to 3 years to get a pay rise, rather than stay at one company for 3 to 5 years, hoping to get promoted and get a pay rise that way. So there's many different philosophies of it. I think the consensus amongst most people nowadays, particularly millennials and Gen Z, is yes, you should job hop every 3 years maximum, because you're going to get a 20 to 30% salary raise switching from one job to the next. But the thing is, that doesn't always work, right? Like, some people, they do make those moves and then they're stuck with a toxic manager. Maybe they get a pay rise, but then after that, their salary raises stagnate, or they switch from one company to the next and then there's a layoff, and then all of a sudden they lost their original job and they just started a new job, and within the year they're part of a job budget cuts, and then they've lost their job again, right? So it's kind of a risky scenario to consider, but there are many opportunities where it could work out. And I'm a career coach, and if you're eager to increase your salary by 30 to 50%, thinking about landing a new job, getting promoted faster, these are all the type of things I cover throughout my coaching programs. I've been in the finance industry for over a decade, Goldman's, Morgan Stanley, many other companies, and links in description for my coaching. But let's get back to this particular scenario, right, and see what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of completing some kind of job hopping throughout your career.
But the problem is that there's a point of diminishing returns, and after you move through the entry-level salary ranges, you often slow down considerably in salary growth. And that's where the previous job hopping can start to bite people a little bit, because suddenly you have to start defending yourself on your resume about why did you leave this job, why did you leave that job, and employers tend to be pretty biased against it. Now, obviously, it's in our best interest to try to move through salary bands as quickly as we can to get into these higher rates of pay, especially given what's going on in the economy. And this strategy was certainly made very popular with the latest wave of employees entering into the workplace over the last 4 or 5 years, and in particular at the height of the job market for job seekers, somewhere around the 2021 to 2022 timeframe. And at this point in time, as you recall, the industry was going through a lot of rapid change. In 2020, we had massive layoffs, and there's nobody hiring on the job market. But the job market came screaming back in 2021 and 2022, and in particular in the tech market, where we saw roles like software developers suddenly becoming extremely hot. And certainly people who were early in their career benefited the most, as they were able to move through these roles much quicker than was probably normal in the past. And as a result, they were able to get some pretty nice salary increases. And you didn't have to stay in roles too terribly long in order to qualify for the next 10 or 15 or 20% bump. So you were kind of foolish not to do that if you wanted to move through these salary bands as quickly as you could. And while it was predominantly contained to tech in the beginning, it did start to spill over into other industries as well. So a lot of people took advantage of job hopping in order to really improve their financial circumstances.
So essentially, it comes down to two different perspectives. Their disadvantages, I think you could be heavily judged. Say you go for an interview later on in your career and you've been job hopping every 2 years, and let's just say every 2 years you've worked at a different company, and then maybe 8 years into your career, you've worked at 4 different companies, 2 years each. And then 8 years into your career, you're interviewing at a job, and they're saying, they're thinking when they're interviewing you, are you going to stick around, or are you going to jump to another job for a pay rise after 2 years, right? So I think in the short term, it can make sense, but over time, you can be heavily judged when you're at the middle of your career. So that's the type of thing to consider. Some of the short-term gains might not be worth it. You might want to stay longer term, maybe 3 to 5 years, to see if you're going to get promoted before you jump to the next job. That's typically what I advise, but I understand different scenarios can vary. For example, you might be working for a small smart tech startup firm, a fintech startup firm, and then it's not going so well after 2 years. You don't think you're going to get promoted. You think you might be facing a layoff. So you have to consider where it might be best job hopping there, rather than sticking around when there's a handful of people at the top, maybe the startup manager's friends, and they're getting all the pay benefits and you're working hard and it's actually going nowhere for you. So it's worthwhile considering what the dynamics are for your particular scenario, rather than following some generic advice. Oh, just job hop every 2 years, that'll be fine. It might not be fine, so you have to think about it. And that's what I advise through my career coaching, what applies best for your scenario. And the thing is, what you want to do is avoid the situation where it could come across, if you're always job hopping, that you're not skilled to move up, right? Sometimes the recruiters or hiring managers will ask, so you went into that job at analyst level, and you've been there for 3 years and you haven't got promoted to vice president, or you haven't got promoted to the next level up. So if you're always job hopping, it kind of indicates, well, you never met the criteria to meet the next level in that company. So you had to leave to go somewhere else, not just to get a pay rise, but to maybe go up a level in your career, which comes down to individual circumstances in a sense. But I think it does show, if you've been like analyst level, let's just say at junior level at 3 different companies, 2 years each, and then after that you move one level up at another company in your fourth batch of 2 years stints at different companies, it reflects like, oh, well, you couldn't really make it to the next level, and you realize you couldn't, so you just left the company and job hop to another one. So it's worthwhile considering, right, what's going on or why you're not progressing, because sometimes it can come down to the company being difficult and delaying your promotion, but sometimes it might suggest you do have a skill issue, or you do have an inability to play the office politics. And if you're going to keep job hopping, think it's going to be better somewhere else, not just the money, but also that the culture is going to be better, and then you can't fit in one corporate culture or another corporate culture, and you job hopping to a third one, you might need to consider your strategy. And that's against things I teach of how to deal with these type of dynamics. So it brings me on to this image I wanted to share here. So here's a case where a CEO is talking about job hopping. Again, there's different perspectives. This is a perspective of a CEO, looks like a girl boss type of CEO, Nelly Wartoff, and she says, job hopping is the number one reason I reject resumes. My reason for it is slightly different than someone else on LinkedIn. I see job hopping as a lack of grit. A job hopper to me is someone who doesn't have the resilience for difficult times. They quit when things get tough. They're always drawn to the next shiny object too easily. They think the grass is always greener on the other side. After the first 12 months of a honeymoon time at a company, then it comes down to delivering the hard stuff at a company. And then it's easier for a newbie to stick at a company for 12 to 24 months and then job hop, because they never have to prove themselves, right? They spend the first year in a new job learning things, the second year doing a bit of work, and then they job hop before they're actually held responsible and accountable over a long time period of 3 to 5 years. That's what she's explaining here, right? She says it shows no grit, no resilience, no perseverance if you are job hopping. And those are the 3 things you need to succeed at working in life, right? The second thing, it says that you have poor decision-making skills. You're unable to get perfect, or you're not able to get on in a very constructive way in your career. You're essentially job hopping all the time because you can't be stable in one role, right? And this is essentially what she explains in longer wording than I just did. But she says there are legitimate reasons of job hopping. Of course, a layoff, if you're relocating to move for family, special personal circumstances. But this is generally and genuinely the approach that many people within corporate will have, right? Just so you're aware, because you might think, well, all my peers at my level, my friends who are all millennials, for example, will say, oh, job hopping's fine. But the recruiters, the hiring managers, the CEOs can, or the managers in general, senior management, they can have these type of negative perceptions of you if you're always job hopping, right? Now, the other perspective, again, I'm trying to play off both views, not just the CEOs or the career coach view, but also your individual view and maybe my critiques of her, right? It comes across like she's an entitled CEO, right? She says a lack of grit, shows a lack of grit if you're always switching jobs. I think she doesn't look like she has grit, right? The photo is quite small here, but you see it on the thumbnail of this video. She looks like she lives a stress-free life as a CEO, right? Who's her secretly funding her company? Is it really her? Does she have a rich father? A private equity firm who's funding her company? Is she actually working hard at her job? Sometimes you see these characters who are business leaders and CEOs, and they come across like stress-free actors, right? And sometimes I question to what extent they're actually doing a lot of work themselves, right? And then the thing is, she doesn't have to deal with the cost of living crisis because she's a CEO, I assume multimillionaire. She's not desperate to leave from one company to the next for money. You know, companies often, you have this whole thing with their budget. They have a budget, they can't give you a pay rise, they can't give you a promotion this year, and then the only way you can get a pay rise is by moving to another company. So she might not understand the personal circumstances of people who are job hopping. And the other thing is, it's kind of very manipulative the way companies work. Companies might say, oh, we can't give you a pay rise, we can't give you a promotion, but at the same time they always have a larger budget for new hires. That's why people do job hop, they often get paid more than people who are already at the company. So for example, say you job hop from Goldman Sachs to Morgan Stanley, and you go from 80 grand at Goldman Sachs to 100 grand at Morgan Stanley. Often the current employees at Morgan Stanley will still be getting paid the old market rate, the average salary from a few years ago, 80 grand, right? But you got the pay rise because you got the most recent rate for hiring someone into the company. So companies typically have a big budget for new joiners compared to employees that are loyal to the company. This is a bit counterintuitive sometimes. And the thing is, she's got a good point here around the grass is not always greener. And this is what I encourage you to think. Don't think you're just going to job hop and you're going to get more money, everything's going to be fine. If you're job hopping, you have to relocate. Is it longer commute to work? Do they want you to be in the office more versus work from home at your old job? Are you going to have a difficult manager, difficult co-workers? Some of this is unknown. You just don't know. You could go into a job and the interview seems fine, manager seems fine, try to pick up on signs that it might have difficult personalities, but you never know. If you job hop into there and they're difficult, then it's going to make your life intolerable for several years. So this is the worthwhile things that you should really consider. What you want to do is take calculated risks by weighing up all the costs and the disadvantages of these things, right? And each job hop, if you're going to be job hopping, should have a legitimate rationale. You should think through, are you going to benefit, the higher pay? Are there any disadvantages? These are the type of things you need to think through. And I think she mentioned here that grit, resilience, and perseverance are important to success in life. And I think generally they are, but are they the key to success in corporate, right? Do you want to have grit? You got to have a certain level of boundaries and assertiveness. Resilience, yes, you're going to have to deal with ups and downs, which could be layoffs, which I'm sure she won't have to deal with as a CEO. And you have to have perseverance to persevere and be determined and disciplined. These are all good things to have. But the thing is, what would I say were the three key ingredients to success in corporate? I would say time management. You don't want to overwork yourself. You don't want to burn out. You should know when to switch jobs, which is also part of time management. Then perception management. Dress well, speak well, being fake nice. Don't take accountability for major screw ups at work. Be on important, profitable projects. And then money management. Invest in your skills, focus on long-term alternative income streams so you don't depend on one day job to pay all of your bills. Maybe you develop other skill sets, learning a foreign language, being able to work abroad. So she says the three key things for succeeding at work is grit, resilience, and perseverance. I would say it's time management, perception management, and money management. And these are the three things that will help you succeed in the corporate environment, right? More so than working hard, more so than any of these other things, grit and resilience. And the thing is, when I see someone like her, again, you can look at her face on the thumbnail, you can see a small image of her here, is that sometimes I see these personalities as CEOs and I just like, you don't really have any stress in your life. So you don't really, like this whole idea of grit and resilience, for you, that's like staying late in the office one evening or doing an early morning meeting or getting off your first class flight and having a quick meeting with your client straight off the flight. It's not really a difficult life for some of these people, the way they portray it to you. They really can't relate or give useful advice to you. And I'm going to make future videos about how ridiculous some of the CEO advice is. Anyway, she talks about how if you're job hopping, it's poor decision making. But the thing is, sometimes people are dealt a bad hand. I know someone I worked with in the finance industry at HSBC and a few other companies he moved on to, was that he had many one-year stints at companies. He worked 1 year at Barclays, then 1 year or so at HSBC, Credit Suisse, he was there for 1 to 2 years, then JP Morgan, he was there for about 2 to 3 years, and then he moved on to UBS or another bank. But the point is, he didn't do anything wrong, and I knew him quite well. It's just that they were always making job cuts. There were always job instability, right? When he was working at HSBC, we won't go into the details, but there were some questions around the management there, lots of high turnover in the team. So it wasn't like he was useless, right? And then he worked at another company, Credit Suisse. There were Brexit was going on, and there were some job cuts or job risks there. So he had to job hop there. Then this impacted his personal life too, because his girlfriend at the time said, well, you don't have any stability in your life financially. And she was doing well in her career in a similar field in finance. And she just saw him as beneath her, right? And then ended up breaking up, and they owned an apartment together, and she moved out and he took over the mortgage and he owns the apartment fully now, and she's left. The point is that there's so many unpredictable things out of your control sometimes as an employee. You can't really rely on this ridiculous CEO advice sometimes. Let's continue to listen to some more analysis.
Gradual decline. So as you can see, being a job switcher back in January 2022 resulted in a 4.7% increase versus somebody who stayed enrolled and only got a 3.7. You got to keep in mind, at the same time, we have inflation that was off the charts. So even at a 4.7, I think that the inflation rate around then was around, 6 or 7, maybe 8%. So even job switchers were still falling further and further behind based on the economy. So it certainly at that point made sense to try to make moves and try to jump ship, because the amount of money that you would make as a job switcher started to decouple from being the job stayer. So if you looked at in January or June of 2022, 4.8% to stay, companies were realizing that they wanted to keep people on board. So you could see how they were improving their wages as well. But it still made a lot more sense to jump ship because they just couldn't compete on the open market in bidding wars. And you saw 6.4% in June to be a job switcher. But if we go to the peak of the market, which was October of 2022, this was like the peak of the job market. If you wanted to leave your role, November of 2022 was the best time to do it. And we saw a 7.7% average increase for somebody who switched jobs versus somebody who stayed in role. It was over 2% lower. And again, this is when companies were still trying to match and trying to retain staff. That was the big mantra at that point in time. But the wage market broke, it seems like sometime like of 2023, which is starting to come down on the job switcher, but then the internal job market, people started to break as well around that period of time. So we saw the data start to switch a little bit sooner with job switchers versus job market. So the companies on the outside market realized like, hey, we're wages up too much for everybody, at least according to them. Now, again, for the job seeker, that's a great thing. But for these companies, what this ends up leading to is layoffs. That's the restructuring and those layoffs that we become so accustomed to, unfortunately, in today's market. And you started seeing a drastic decrease in the amount of wages that employers are willing to pay for job switchers and even retaining people. And as you're trying to quote unquote reset the market, you're doing a lot of laying off and restructuring. And we saw a huge increase in the number of people who were applying for jobs at this point in time. This is where the job market kind of went off the rails. It's kind of like whiplash. First is bad, then it was or really terrible, then it was amazing, and then it's been really bad ever since. And as you're seeing, when your company has a lot of options, they've got a lot of people to choose from, they can be much more selective and they can pay lower. It's the law of supply and demand. And as we're seeing over time into June 2024, the summer, basically back to the beginning of the year, and now, it's really kind of January of 2025, 4.8% to switch versus 4.6% to stay. So the incentive for leaving jobs is just not there anymore.
I would say, generally saying here, you should your same job, particularly when job markets are unstable, as you can see right now. And then, I think corporate mainstream media, which support corporations, and you should always understand mainstream media like this, the Wall Street Journal, is like the voice of. So if they're telling you to stay in your job, it's probably what the corporations want you to do too, right? Now, he's mentioning November 2022 was changing around this period. I just want you to kind of understand, any player, let me know in the comments. Everything in time is moving quicker, particularly since 2020. I would say even going back to 2016, but since 2020, time has been moving quicker. Everything's accelerating. It's not that like the changes you see over the last 5 years or even years, which is the graph on your screen right now, 2022 to 2025. Those type of changes occur typically in the job market over a 5-year period, over a 7-10-year period, but this is just over a 3-year period, right? And it shows that everything's moving faster. The economy is having rapid upswings, then downswings, rapid hiring patterns, then layoffs. These are the rapid changes you're seeing really in a collapsing society, right? So just bear in mind, right? When you do have good years and you do have a year where you're making a ton of money, perhaps save it, invest it. Don't think it's going to last forever. Like, we've got going boom period for the next 5 years. It might be 2 years, and then you're facing a layoff, and it takes you 6 months to find your next job. So don't really kind of count on that. I think I'd say, right? In my opinion, it does depend on individual situation, but just think about one in your industry, right? Rather than just a news article, things like that. I think when it comes to think about job switching, don't just think about the pay rise. Also think about you don't want to get trapped. For example, I know people who moved from working in major investment banks where they weren't making any progress in their career, they weren't getting promoted, they weren't getting pay rises. So they moved from the investment bank to some of the big four firms. They moved to like KPMG, Deloitte. Those jobs have a reputation for not having good pay and for overworking you. So they got a slight pay rise moving from an investment bank to that company because they wanted to make some progress to like a KPMG or then they realized they were overworked, and then it became very difficult for them to move back to an investment bank because investment banks are very focused on perception. So if they like see you in like a big like KPMG, they're like, oh, we're not going to hire someone who's working at KPMG into our investment bank. We'll just hire someone from another investment bank to our investment bank, because they can be very status driven like that. So it's kind of difficult, like how much perception plays whether you're going to get hired or not, right? You just got to bear in mind, right? Companies increasingly focused on more efficiency, less employees, more outsourcing, more offshoring. So sometimes if you do have a stable job role, you might not always want to think, oh, I'm just going to leave this and get a 5% pay rise somewhere else. Let's look at a different perspective here. This is an excerpt from LinkedIn. It's disappointing to see how much job hopping there is out there. I love to see folks who've shown the effectiveness within a company for 3 to 6 years at a time, promotion, or 2 or 3 during each stint. Seeing folks switch companies every 8 to 24 months does not inspire confidence in a hiring manager. If you feel like you haven't been able to find the right home, the right job, you should be more in your job search. If you're getting bored quite quickly in your job, consider setting yourself up as a consultant rather than switching careers every 8 to 24 months to sustain your attention. So this is what I'm about, how you're being perceived. Job hopping, I think, in my opinion, it's a good thing, right? It can work depending on the circumstances, but people, hiring managers, recruiters, they'll typically see it like, well, why are you always switching jobs? Maybe you can't seem to fit in the work environment. So the thing is here, he's saying it's quite disappointing to see job hopping. But what I'd say is what is ideal and what is the real world is very difficult, right? Different, right? Some people go and work for a new company and then they have a layoff, so they have to job hop. So it's not really performance related. It's not necessarily sometimes pay related. It's just people have to deal with layoffs back to back sometimes, you know. I would say 5 years is ideal to work at a company, but it's not guaranteed. So, you know, sometimes people are in a situation with a toxic manager and they have to job hop 2 years back to back from one company to another, right? And what I mean, you have to be careful about the red flag, though, that he's pointing out here, you know, saying that you can corporate, you can't have a home in your job in the sense that you can't find somewhere you can settle in your job. You're always getting bored. These are the type of things you're going to be perceived. Like you just can't focus on one thing at a time. You just kind of lose interest in it on. So I think it's somewhat a fair criticism. I would even say as a career coach, it's worthwhile digging deep. If you are job hopping quite often, is it just for the money? Is it just because there's an underlying issue and you don't like the type of work you do? You want to try something different? And consider what the reason is. That's something I'd be able to help with too, to help. So now we're going to consider the perspective of someone else called Aaron Knightley. He gives an interesting on job hopping too. Let's hear what he has to say.
Now I hear some of you say, well, Aaron, what about when it comes to the job interview? What are we meant to say when they ask us, oh, you've moved around quite a lot? I personally don't know why we overcomplicate this and we actually make this into a thing. Because the answer is very simple. You tell them whatever you want. Tell them whatever they need to hear in the job interview. So for example, they say to me, Aaron, you've moved around job to job in the last few years. Are you all right just to give a bit of background to what's happened there? Yeah, no worries. The reason I left my last job is because I did express to them that I'm really looking to grow, I want to think outside the box and I want to bring more to the table, and I am looking to grow within this company, but they didn't have the positions available and the growth just wasn't there for me. And I'm someone that doesn't like to sit still. I really want to add value to the company and I want to grow and push the vision forward, and that just wasn't there for me. I did say to them I'd be willing to hang around for the next 6 months, but they said it was unlikely there was going to be a position available. Just say that every time. Again, I don't know why we make it such a big thing. This whole, oh, well, job interviewers, they want to know exactly what you've been up to, about references and all this, it's rubbish. They don't care. Tell them whatever you want. Use my example, and every time you go to a job interview, just tell them exactly the same thing. They're not going to ring each other up and be like, you know, blah, blah, Aaron, and they don't know each other. Stop overcomplicating it. In the 80s and 90s, perhaps they wanted to know and actually look at a CV. Now they don't care. I hire people just based on if I like them. I mean, that's the world, right? If you're good in an interview and you can show creativity and that you've got drive and ambition, happy days, you're likely to get the job.
So he's got a fair point here, right? I would say job interviews, I think it's a bit more complicated than this, but the point is when you move into a new job, you don't always have to explain exactly what happened at the last job. You don't have to say the manager was difficult, they weren't paying me enough. It does depend on the industry. Sometimes gossip does spread. If it's a small industry and everyone knows each other, they might know the reality of why you're leaving a company. But generally speaking, you don't have to just a level of personal information. You don't want to get for job hopping just for a slight pay rise at each company, but nothing wrong with moving for money if that's what benefits you. And I definitely agree with making up lies in the interview, right? I'm not saying you should lie about everything, but companies are not going to checks on exactly what happened at your last company. So you can just, like, corporate is a lot of comforting lies. That's the way I would see it, particularly in job interviews. People just care about cultural fit. Do you feel like you'll fit in with the co-workers? It's about that more than competency, like he says here when it comes to hiring people for himself. It's all about fitting in. So job hopping can work out. It's just a calculated decision that you need to make. And that brings me on to my last image here. Another excerpt from LinkedIn. David Falam, who's a VP in marketing, says that it took me a long time to accept that job hopping is bad. I started my career with a bunch of short stints. I just told myself I'm going to go where the opportunities are. But then interviewers would complain that I am continually job hopping with short-term employment at different companies. The recruiters will say that he's not in a position because he keeps job hopping essentially, and he felt like in denial, or they just didn't accept his skill level and things like that. And then this is what he kind of realized as he moved forward. He was saying that he's working at this company. People think the onboarding period of a company is 2 weeks when you do all the training, when you join a new company, the standard corporate training. But he said, no, the truth is the first year of your job is soaking up the work you're doing. You need a few quarters of execution and maybe go through an annual planning cycle or performance review for things to really click. The fun stuff, when you truly build expertise in what you're doing, happens in the second and third year at the company. It's hard to accept an annoying truth that recruiters and hiring managers will discount job hoppers, especially now there are many people applying for every job. You might have good reason to job hop. You might have been job hop for a new job every 12 to 18 months, but it doesn't matter. And this is what I mean. From my perspective and your perspective, job hopping isn't a bad thing. It's going to give you a pay rise. You'll learn some new skills. You get another company on a resume. But the way you're perceived by these older baby boomer bosses, these people who have secure jobs for life. And that's the thing I want to explain to you. Because if you watch my content, you're probably someone who might not fit in corporate, but you're there for the money. When you're dealing with people who are already set in their life, in the sense that they have a stable job, they fit in the corporate environment, they're older, middle-aged guy, woman, girl boss, feminist type, liberal, soy boy type of guy. The corporate simps, so they don't understand why you'd be job hopping, because they just fit in at work. They might not be getting paid that well, or they might be from an older generation who's just going to ride it out from 40 to 60 to retirement. So they will probably think there's something wrong with you for job hopping, or why don't you fit in the corporate environment? So they don't understand our perspective. They just see their perspective like, oh, you didn't fit in one job and you just went to the next. Maybe something's wrong with you. These are the type of games that do get played, right? We think about money, we think about profit, we think about productivity. They think about perception, they think about popularity. That's the contrast here, right? That's the hiring managers like, you must not have been work if you keep job hopping every 2 years. This is the ridiculousness you have to deal with. And it brings me on to the second career code. I have a career code course that can help you manage office politics, and it says leveraging skills beats company loyalty. You must create leverage and control perception so you stay adaptable in a system that rewards politics over performance. And what do I mean by that? Basically, if you're the person who relates to the content on my channel, you're probably focused on your skills. You probably understand being loyal to a company isn't a good thing. So you have to always gauge it right. When you do job hop, you don't want to get pattern of job hopping, and you want to make it very strategic. Like, okay, I've maxed out and do at this company. Maybe you've been there for 3 years, try to get promoted. You can tell they're leading you on. You got another recruiter contacting you saying you can get another job at 20% pay rise. It's relatively near where you live. Not a long commute, not additional costs for travel or time like that. You can tell from with them, maybe it's a similar job to what you do now, so it's not going to be stressful. Then you make the calculated decision to move. These are all the type of things you have to think through. Now, If you found that helpful, let me know in the comments. Like I say, I have 10 years experience. I'll really help you secure promotions faster or find your next dream job. All the links for coaching are in the description. There's the career code that I mentioned below, also linked for you to learn about office politics like this. And there's a free newsletter every Monday and Friday. You will get a free email sent to your email mailbox, and tons of helpful career tips so you can get through the work week without too much stress. Let me know what you think about in the comments about job hopping. Does it work for you? Are you planning on job hopping? And there are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and I'll see you next time.